What's up guys, CJ here, and I'm going to be talking about the patch 7.8 notes that came out today, and I'm also going to be talking about the mid-season 2017 changes. So I haven't looked at this yet, but just going into it, blah 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 blah. Am I still coming up? So typically the mid-season change does not affect MSI, as you know that'd be extremely volatile for the pro players going into the MSI challenge. Will be released later in patch 7.8. Cool. Aatrox is still struggling with consistency, especially in the jungle. His new passive is much more difficult to access in the jungle than the old one, so we're tuning that. As well, we're adding some power back into self-healing to help him feel safer staying in fights. His passive, new monstrous determination hellbent, now refreshes when fighting monsters. So remember, monsters are different than minions, so they're giving incentive for Aatrox to be played in the jungle mostly. And the attack speed goes from 20, 30, 40, 50 to 30, 40, 50, 60. W is going to go from 5% of health to 6.5% missing health as the heal. So when you think of the state of the junglers, you think of contestable junglers. And is Aatrox ever going to beat Lee Sin or Elise? Not really, right? So because the fact that Aatrox only has access to 3 abilities, while Lee Sin and Elise have access to 6 or 7 abilities, depending on what point it is in the game, you're almost never going to be able to play him in the jungle. And if you're going to play him in the lane, the fact that you have attack speed in the lane doesn't really change the aspects of the lane, because in the lane you're only ever really going to go for one auto trades against another melee champion, because no melee champion's ever going to let you get 1 or 2 autos on them while they're only getting 1 auto on you. And most of the time it's a situation where you're going to be trading skill rotations as well. So the attack speed doesn't really change that much. The attack speed changes pushing structure, so you'll be able to push lanes a little bit more in lanes that you were able to access the minions in the first place. But if you weren't able to win those matchups already, like if you're gonna get zoned out by Renekton or whatever, then you won't be able to auto attack the minions to shove anyway, right? So it doesn't change losing matchups. It just helps already winning matchups. Similarly for the health, yes, you're gonna heal more, but if you're getting into a burst duration fight, the health isn't gonna matter as much if someone can 100 to 0 you. So there's just more incentive to pick Aatrox in scenarios where he can have lane matchups that are sustainable. You're obviously not going to be picking him in the jungle because he can't contest the current jungle structure. But you're going to be picking him into lane matchups where you could already access the wave, because you can 1v1 them, and you're going to be able to have a slightly better snowball potential with increased attack speed, and you're going to be dying a little bit less with the heal. That being said, it doesn't answer back the already losing lane matchups, because you're never going to be able to walk into lane versus Kled or Renekton or all these other champions. And you're already going to be winning lane against tanks, but tanks operate outside of the lane phase. So it doesn't really change anything, but it's a buff nonetheless. Amumu, passive, bonus true damage from 15% magic damage dealt, calculated after the damage that is reduced from magic resist to 10%. And W percentage health, 1, 1.52, 2.5, 3%, 2, 1, 1.25, 1.5, 1.7, 2%. So they're toning down the target's max health percentage damage and the damage dealt from after it was reduced by magic damage to before it was reduced by magic damage. So we have to think of this in terms of numbers, right? Let's say that I have 100 MR, right? And I'm calculating after reducing magic resist. So let's say I'm a Mumu, I don't know, somehow I can reduce their magic damage by 20, right? So I go from 100 to 80. Then I'm going to be doing 15% after that, right? But 15% after that is going to be less than taking 15% off the top of the 100, right? So they're making the 10% come before. So if I had 100 MR, 10%, I'm going to be cutting 10 off to become 90, and then I'm going to be moving the magic resist away. So it really just matters how much magic resist shed you're going to be building on Amumu in the first place, right? Because if you're not going to be building any pen to reduce their MR, then you would rather have, you would rather skim 10 off the top. Or you would rather skim 15 off the top and then, just take the 15 over the 10. But if you were going to build MR shredding items, then you would prefer this bottom one because you want to hit them with a hard 10% before, and then you want to take all the individual points after, which will have more value. So it really begs the question of what pen, do you really go for on Amumu? And I would say that Liandry's Amumu is pretty legit. I'd say that most AP jungle champions want to build Liandry's most of the time, unless you're pure tanking. So you don't really want to build Sork Boots, in my opinion, and maybe you want to pick up Abyssal sometimes. So I think that overall, this is a buff because you're going to find that you're rarely going to build Sorks, and if you're going to build an MR item on Amumu, your job isn't the hundreds to zero them. You want to be somewhat tanky, right? So Abyssal is something you can go for, but you're more likely, if you're going to go for an MR, to go into the Locket type of structure. And the only real type of damage you're going to be going for is the Liandry's, which is 15. And 15 after the 10% isn't going to be as much as 15%. And then after that, you're going to be reducing the MR. So I think overall this is a slight buff due to this word structure, although I think Mumu. I think that he doesn't have, and I don't play that much of Mumu, so I'm going to be honest with you, I don't think he has any huge shred in his kit. Right? There's no shred here. There's magic damage, but there's no shred here. There's no shred here. And he just applies curse, but yeah, so he doesn't have any natural pen in his kit, which means that I think this is an overall buff, but this is going to be a net nerf. Or this is an overall nerf because you would rather have 15 because you're not going to build enough MR pen anyway. So overall, I think it goes as a nerf, but if you were going to build full AP Amumu, which I don't think you should do, it would be a buff. But then again, you're never going to really go Sork, Shoes, Abyssal, Liandry's Amumu, because it's a little suicidal and it's not competitive really. And then this is obviously a clear nerf. The question is, can Amumu contest other junglers? Since the past Amumu change, you find that the answer is no. Amumu shouldn't really be able to contest other junglers based on the fact that you're just not having enough spell rotations, even though your Q and E come off relatively short based on if you're being hit by other minions or not. But if you're fighting like a Lee Sin in the river with no other damage sources onto you to get your E lower, then you're not really able to 1v1, so it's super greedy to pick in the jungle anyway. Ivern W, dropping brushes directly on target on top of epic monsters no longer hides it from the enemy vision. You can still deny enemy vision from an entire area by creating a wall of brushes, thereby denying vision. So I think that this is minorly impactful. This is just one point of how Ivern operates in a objective control situation. And you can still deny enemy vision. So you're going to be using, like, you don't need to put a brush on the epic monster because it no longer hides it, right? So instead you can put, one brush on your teammates and then 2 to hide away, or 2 on you and 1 to deny vision. As opposed to before, you had to put 1 on yourself, 1 on the objective, and then you could put the 1 to hide yourself, I guess. So I guess you're going to be minorly impacted, but overall shouldn't change how Ivern operates too much. Ivern really doesn't have a strong dragon in the early game anyway, because he can't really solo it himself, so he needs typically the bot and the mid to be strong and win the situation, or reverse 3v2 or whatever. to be able to get the dragon anyway. So insofar as you're in that situation where you already turned and you can go for the dragon, you really shouldn't be in threat of a steal because you should have control of the area behind the dragon anyway. And similarly, Ivern isn't a champion that really goes for Baron rushes notoriously. You typically go for baits with Ivern W, and this just minorly decreases the bait structure because you can still see the epic monster, the Baron, but overall you would rather put your brushes in bait scenarios that are closer to the enemy team rather than on top of the objective. So I don't think it changes too much. Karthus Q, layaways can now be buffered. Cast inputs a layaway explodes now, automatically fires when layaway's command comes off, unless Karthus cancels a command. So this is just a nice little latency delimiter, and sort of like how some champions can buffer spells even though they're being CC'd or whatever. I think it's just a quality of life change, so it's pretty nice. Passive for Lysandra, 18, 15, 12, 9 at 1, 6, 11, 16. So we, and bug fix the bug that caused Iceborne cooldown to not be reduced when Frost killed the unit. Q ratios 0.65 to 0.7. So Q ratio buff, pretty nice, but we have to look at how much AP Lysandra actually builds. And Lysandra has a pretty bad mid lane situation because you're not allowed to front the wave generally because your Q range is too short, and you don't really want to throw your E at the enemy. And your ults, like, you only really want to ult when you're doing a all-in or a defensive play. So Lysandra has a hard time fronting the wave up against other ranged champions such as Orianna and Ahri because she won't be able to front the wave, while Ahri can Q you if you're attempting to front the wave. So Lysandra is mostly played in the top lane. And you think of who she versus in the top lane, there's going to be a decent amount of melee champions. So this is obviously something that will help the top lane shove structure, which will move into first movement rotation into the dragon area, moving into the enemy jungler. And as the ranged champion against certain melee champions, you should be the first one to move anyway. So this is just going to help that a little bit, get a little bit more harassment for the lethal. In concerning this bug fix, no one really builds Iceborne, so who gives a damn? Iceborne is an armor AP item, but if you were going to go an armor item on Lysandra, you would prefer to go Zanya's generally. You don't really get an auto off in your rotation enough to justify Iceborne, so it's whatever. So the only real change in the passive is it goes level 6 through level 16 changes to decreasing mana cooldowns from 15, 12, 9. So you have to look at the current state of Lysandra builds. And when you think about the current state of Lysandra builds, what mana is there? Roa is not typically built too much these days, and there aren't really that many mana-oriented items outside of Morello that get built. But even Morello is a greedy build these days because the Lysandra build you typically want to go for wants to involve one of the tier 2 boot types, either Sorks generally or Lucidity. You want to be able to get the Zanyas at some point in time usually, but if you want to skip that, then your initial build up against 80 champions in the top lane are going to be the Seekers and probably a little bit of health coming out from the Haunting guys or Proto Belts. And if you're versus AP champions, you can typically get away with going for the Negatron Abyssal route. So there's not really a lot of mana coming out of her builds because Morello is a more greedy build, and as a top laner, you're not the one that maximizes the amount of resources on the map. You're kind of looking for a wave adjustment first for mobility and all that stuff. And most of your pressure in the game is to the mid lane and the bot lane because Dragon is more important than topside Herald as the game starts off, because Herald doesn't spawn until 10 minutes. So I think this buff does have some impact in the game, but the buff impact only happens at the spike interval levels of 6, 11, and 16. And so you have to think about the case of mana at level 16. So you're essentially halving the passive from 18 to 6. Now, will you have mana problems at level 16? Probably not. At level 16, you're probably either shoving waves and then roaming, in which case you might burn some mana using E. I know that when I play Lissandra, I use my E to get to push to get to the situation faster, things like this. And you're going to have... It doesn't increase your mana regen. It just makes the wave shove a little better since you're not using mana for the first rotation, right? So I think that this buff will be felt because even at level 6, your mana pool is relatively small. You can't super spam or anything, right? So you're definitely going to feel this. You're going to be like, oh, my passive's coming back. I'm going to get one extra instance where I can harass here, one extra instance where I can shove here. You're going to be leaving lane and you're going to be having, I don't know, maybe 200 mana up when you're going for the Dragon Roam, which is going to actually impact into your ability to spam a second Q, a third Q, or these types of things. So I think that there will be a marginal increase in Lissandra play, and I feel like this does impact the state of Lissandra as well as this. Do I think that Lissandra is one of the better top lane picks? No, I do not, because when you look at the structure of picks in the game, bot lane range support is key, and range supports aren't hyper tanks, so you're going to need your tanks to come out of the jungle and the top lane generally, because mid lane is the AP mage and bot lane is the AD range. And the reason why, you don't need multiple mages and multiple AD carries, right? Because one is enough generally. So insofar as the bot is the AD carry range champion and the mid is the AP carry range champion because it's the shortest lane to get the maximum amount of resources and levels for the mage that needs more levels, you're going to need to... and because you don't need two range mages and 2 range ADs, most of your tanks are going to come from the jungle and top lane role. And while the jungler typically wants to take Thunderlords to snowball the game, because they want to have maximum gank impact and dual ability to not get their jungle taken from them, you're going to be playing a primary role as a top lane tank most of the time. So does Lissandra fill the criteria of, going for the top lane tank role? Not the best, not really. So I don't think this will put Lissandra in a situation where she's a top lane pick priority. Maybe in solo queue you can do some things with it where you don't need a solid tank structure, but insofar as competitive, I don't think she'll be there. Maybe we'll get to a point where Lissandra can come back to the mid lane, and that'd be an interesting way to develop this and see that these buffs go into. But in the current structure of the game, I don't see that Lissandra can contest the better mid champions like Ahri and Orianna. So we go on to Malzahar, base armor down, and W Voidling health from 3 to 2, Voidling gold to 5. So this is really, really poor for Malzahar, because the fact that you can 2-shot Voidlings and not 3-shot them make it so that a range AD and a range melee champion, as soon as Malzahar's W comes up, can just auto-attack. And we're talking about mostly Malzahar in the support role. We'll talk about him in the mid in a little bit. Malzahar's pretty bad in the jungle. And while the gold reward is down, this is fairly negligible because, you don't really want to give gold to the enemy, of course, but that's not the main point of your W. The fact that it goes from 3 to 2 is going to be meaning that before the Voidling even gets in range of the enemy champion, insofar as support is ranged and AD carry is ranged, you're going to be auto-attacking down 1 each. And while that is a situation that's going to force the enemy to attack your Voidling instead of attacking the minion structure or attacking the enemy for the trade, I think that overall it's a huge nerf to Malzahar. Malzahar support was already seeing a downhill activity because there were other contestable ways of dealing with the Voidling W after the range nerf on the W, and this just is a hyper gut to the Malzahar support, especially with a 2 armor decrease in an AD lane with 2 ranged champions who are going to both use their auto attacks on you to trade. The 2 armor is actually huge when you're considering the fact that it's from 2 separate champions, one of them primarily an AD carry. So I think Malzahar support is pretty much dead unless you want to play concede lane, and people don't really want to play concede lane. And in the mid lane, you might still have some methodology for picking Malzahar in the mid lane because you can still play the hyper shove strat, like, you know, super shoving like Echo or Diana, where you use your Voidlings to shove and then you go to farm Raptors and then you shove and you go to farm Wolves and you do this type of thing in the mid lane. That being said, Malzahar is not the best mid lane mage in the game because he has the percentage damage, and his AP scaling ratio is, I think, just pretty moderate. Let me double check it here. Yeah, so he has no AP scaling from his W, effectively none from 0.2 AP, and his Malefic Visions, his E, gets mostly a lot of flat damage, but I guess his Q and his E are 0.7 AP ratios, and then the point is that his ult is 1.5% per 100 AP, and you're really hard pressed to build that much AP throughout the game, especially on a champion who needs to go relatively melee to use their ultimate, and who doesn't have a really far extended Q or has to get in decent range for the W to matter now that the range nerf has happened, and that, you know, you need to get into a closer range to land the E. It's just that Malzahar is a relatively close range mage comparative to other mages, whereby the effectiveness of his ult puts him in a good 1v1 status or a 2v1 status, but in the structure of a team fight, you're just not going to be able to land poke like some other mages. And I think for that reason, you're not going to be seeing him in the support or the mid lane role, and I think he's pretty gutted. Nautilus, base stats, growth, mana regen growth, 0.7 to 0.5, E Riptide cost, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 to 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. So I think that this is a problem for Nautilus. When you think of Nautilus already, he acts as a semi-engager, as a top lane with QER. But in terms of comparative tanks, outside of the Maokai change, you see Shen being picked up mostly as the other major tank, because if you're going to pick a tank, you'd rather pick one with a global structure to impact the game and be able to do cross-map plays and moderate waves in the mid and late game. And Shen can still engage with E-Flash, although Nautilus has an easier time of engaging because of Q and R. That being said, you could always pick up Kled, who can 1v1 the Nautilus and can also engage as well, right? So Nautilus should already have been seeing a decline because he competes less in lane against Kled and Shen in the late game, and this is just going to hurt him even more. You think about the mana items Nautilus can build. It turns out that the D-Ring is the major item outside of the Frozen Heart, but Frozen Heart isn't the most optimal item to build these days because it's just it's an aura item that decreases enemy attack speed, but insofar as the enemy AD carry, and typically it's the AD carry who values the attack speed, so if the enemy AD carry is going to get autos on you anyway, decreasing it by 0.2% isn't going to matter that much because either the AD carry does damage you or doesn't do damage to you. And although you're going to be surviving a couple more seconds in the net vacuum of things by building Frozen Heart, it's really not the item you want to build, because you either want to be able to tank them enough or have enough CC to kill them. So you're going to be wanting, the Rannoon slow to get to them, or you're going to be wanting, better CDR items with health to make use of your W. Frozen Heart is an item built, but it's not really the best item. But the fact that you might be tunneled into having to build it to deal with the mana issue, I don't think the mana issue is a big deal, because Nautilus only in the early game doesn't really use Riptide at all to clear the wave, right? Mainly uses it after a gank has been initiated and you need to push the wave. And in that case, the situation is already resolved and good for you, or you're using it as harass, in which case you have to harass a little bit less often, but insofar as you're harassing them, that means you can win the lane structure already, so that's already good for you. It only really hurts the wave clear situation where, let's say, Maokai and Nautilus are in top lane and they're just shoving in each other's waves, in which case maybe Nautilus will run out of mana first, outside the D-ring structure because of the mana. But outside of that situation, if you're going to be able to shove a wave, then you can pretty much easily go back under your turret base and then walk back to top and then catch the re-shove wave back into you a lot of the time. This will give the enemy top laner shove initiative to go for the first roam, but so maybe there are going to be like 1 or 2 waves where this change is going to be really instrumental in how the dragging comes about. But overall, I don't see this making a big difference in the late game, and I don't see it making a big difference in the early game. It only makes a small difference in the mid game structure, whereby whoever gets to shove first gets the first roam or doesn't have to base. And I think that generally, if you're only using it once per wave, and a wave comes roughly every 30 seconds, and you're regening, 0.5 mana per second, it's going to take you a minute to regen 30 mana, and you're not going to have enough, so maybe you just build that second D-ring for sure, or you build that Sapphire Crystal earlier in your build. Does it change Nautilus as a pick? Not really. Will there be micro situations where Nautilus is worse? Yes, but overall, it should still be picked. Rise Q overload cooldown reset now occurs when Rune Prisoner Spellflex are cast rather than when they hit their target. So this is a Rise buff clearly. The cooldown comes up earlier on Q. I think Rise is still in a situation where you can pick him. It's a little bit of a greedier pick since he goes double scaling items. I don't see most players or most teams doing that. Maybe in the EU LCS a little bit, but Rise is still in the relatively same state. I still think Rise has merit to being picked for sure. The reason why Rise isn't being picked is because people have gotten able to deal with the level 1 shove by using the jungler to counteract the level 1 Rise shoves, where Rise goes for a Sapphire Crystal shove into the base tier, and people typically use stronger junglers in the mid lane 2v2 to be able to do that, as well as the fact that a lot of mid laners can do a counter shove where they are able to hit all 6 minions such as Ahri or Orianna. Shen Q empowered attacks bonus 30, 50, 70, 90, 110 against non-champions, so 15, 20, 25, 30, 35, 40 against any enemy. Monster's Determination deals double damage to monsters, still has a cap. Shadow Dash 180 to 150 with 100 to 120. R-Stand United 180, 150, 120, 200, 180, 160. Shield 250, 550, 850 to 175, 350, 525. Scaling up to 280, 560, 840 based on an ally's current health. Shield maxes out at 40% health. So let's start by looking at the ultimate here, I think. So when we look at the cooldown, it's clearly a cooldown increase of 20 seconds, 30 seconds, and then 40 seconds. So I think that overall that's going to be a nerf to Shen, as I think Shen should be nerfed, because when you typically pick Shen, you're picking it into a tank matchup counter, because if 2 tanks are top, then you want to pick the tank that's able to have the better map impact ability, and you're going to have R, and in the late game you're going to be able to use your R to get to the fight base and then go for the split again, and then there won't be a contestable TP from the enemy top laner. So I think that it's making it slightly more punishing in the early game to use your ultimate, and obviously in the late game to use your ultimate, which I think should be the case because it's such a unique ultimate, unless even Galio ult isn't that global. Maybe Kled ult gets pretty close, but there's no ult like it where you can literally go to any point on the map without having to use your teleport. So I think a nerf is warranted, but the fact that you have this skill at all isn't makes Shen strong, makes him broken, right? Because there's no other mechanic like this in the game, so it typically makes Shen broken. So increasing its cooldown by 20, 30, and 40 with consecutive levels, yes, it makes it more punishing, and you're going to be in micro scenarios where your ult isn't up yet. But does that mean that Shen's not at the top of the hill for tanks? No, he's still there. Shield, the numbers get decreased from shield, but can scale up based on allies' current health. Shield max is at 40% health. So if the enemy, or if the ally that I'm trying to ult is at 40% health or lower, then I'm going to be getting these numbers. So 280, so from 250, 560 from 550, and 840 from 850. So in the late game, this 10 damage is pretty negligible, right? But the fact that it goes, like if I'm ulting, okay, so we look at the situations where Shen ult goes off, right? So when Shen ult goes off for an initiate, typically the initiator is hidden. Something like the Rek'Sai tunneling in, or the Gragas E-flashing, or the support Thresh flash hooking, or whatever, right? So these are champions that are going to be at 100% health anyway, which means that in the mid and late game you're going to be getting these numbers, 350, 525. But you don't really care about the amount of the shield as an engager. So the only thing this really changes is shielding allies who are getting hit and, in situations that are dire to their health. So that typically comes from the mid laner, the AD carry, and the jungler scenario. So it's typically a situation that's going to be turned on your team, and your jungler starts taking a lot of damage, or your mid laner gets ganked. And number one, if your mid or AD or jungler are going to get ganked and going to need your ult like that, then they're already making a mistake, right? So that shouldn't be happening in the first place, or you're using it as a bait. And if you're using it as a bait, then fine, you should be super ready to react, and then the health numbers don't really change, because you're going to be, like, if it's in a lane phase and you're setting up a lane phase play, yes, you're losing 100 shield damage, which is going to impact the state of the 2v2 or the 3v3 or whatever. But overall, if you're using it as a bait, then you should be judging the amount of damage you can take based on these numbers, so it's not really going to matter. Overall, you have to use it to save an ally for this to be the correct usage of what they're trying to imply here, or the ally's current health being extremely low. So I wonder if there are champions whose health gets extremely low that I'm not thinking about that can make better use of some initiation. Like turn potentials where your Gragas takes, or your Lee Sin takes like 50% of his health and now he's low, but he wants to go for the re-engage. So he goes in again, and now the shield matches what it was before. Obviously, overall, it is a nerf. Obviously, you get 30 more here and 10 more here. But these are just negligible shield numbers that shouldn't impact like the importance of the situation, because if you're in a bad situation and you need these micro shield numbers, then it's already bad anyway. I don't know. I don't really know that I feel about it. I feel like you're going to die in micro situations that are mistakes in solo queue, but in competitive it shouldn't change too much. Buff to E cost with increase, so this is a clear E buff. The E flash is going to be stronger, and the cooldown increase means you're going to get more taunts. And I don't think Shen needed a buff. I think his E was pretty good. He was already one of the strongest tanks, so I think this was bad. In terms of balance, so you're going to be dealing double damage to monsters, putting Shen in a jungle role, but Shen can't contest other junglers, so he shouldn't really be played in the jungle role anyway. And you're going to be losing damage against monsters, but gaining some damage against enemies, I think. So before, your Q empowered AD didn't do anything against enemy champions, so now you're going to get extra damage against any enemy, so enemy champions. And it really questions, does Shen need help shoving? And the answer to that is, you don't really pick Shen to shove the lane anyway, right? If you really want to shove the lane, you would pick a different champion, right? You would pick a AoE type of clear champion. So the fact that you're able to contest other enemies now is super important, because now maybe you'll be able to hold your own better against Nautilus, right? So this should be an innate buff against other tanks, innate buff against other tanks, global nerf to the mid lane and whatever. But you're going to be hard pressed to get your lane to shove. That being said, Shen doesn't really need to shove the lane too often. His roam doesn't really come up that often. You really want to ult to the target a lot of the time. So it shouldn't impact the situation too much. Maybe your shove is a little slower now to shove a wave in when the enemy team is there, so you're going to be losing, or you're not going to be denying micro minions against the enemy tower a lot. But overall, it should be a buff. Buff to Shen, nerf to Shen late, but still top of the hill, and nerf to Shen late, but shouldn't really matter. Udyr, who gives a damn about Udyr? General mana cost 47, 41, 48, 38, 35 to 50 to 33. So they make his late mana cost less, but his early mana cost more. Who really cares about late mana cost? You have a ton of mana, so he's nerfed in the early game mana situation. That being said, you're mostly played as a jungler anyway, if at all. So you typically get first blue off anyway. Removed. Basic attacks no longer deal an additional 15% of Udyr's total AD. As bonus damage, one Tiger, new repeated mauling. Udyr's first in every third basic attack after that. One Tiger stance are Tiger strikes, applying the stance damage over time. Tiger strike damage went from 30, 80, 130, 180, 230 over 2 seconds to 30, 60, 90, 120 over 2 seconds. So they're nerfing the initial amount of Tiger strike damage. Successive Tiger strikes against the same target will instantly deal all the remaining damage of the previous instance, in addition to applying a new one. So when they say previous instance, it's a singular. So let's say I get one Tiger stance strike off, and then I get another one. I'll be dealing the previous one as well, which makes his multiple autos more impressive, I guess. So let's say I'm auto-attacking someone and I proc. I hit them 3 times. First and every third basic attack after that. So the first, the third, the sixth, the ninth auto attack is going to do the Tiger Strike damage. So let's say I have level 5 Q for some reason. My first is going to do 150 over 2 seconds. My third is going to do 150 my third strike is going to do 150 over 2 seconds plus the initial 150. So I think that's actually pretty strong, because instead of having to go wait for the 6th attack or whatever, it's going to be pretty good. And you don't really care about this previous thing anyway, right? Because you didn't really build AD on Udyr anyway. You shouldn't really build AD. He's a melee champion with no gap closer and doesn't really play as an assassin, so you should be playing him as a tank anyway. So I think the justifiability in decreasing the physical damage, or the Tiger Strike damage, is upgraded by the fact that you're going to be doing effectively 300 here, right? So you shouldn't be comparing this 230 to 150. Like, for the initial strike, it's going to be 150. But if you get a third strike off, it's going to be 150 plus another 150, so it's going to be 450. Whereas here it's going to be 230 plus another 230, so it's going to be 460, right? So at the third strike, you're almost breaking even, and at the 6th strike, you're definitely breaking even. That being said, we have to look at whether or not Udyr's skills Q in general. And I would say that Max E and Max W are required. So you're really deciding between maxing R and maxing Q, and in what order that takes. So let's say that you're not maxing Q, and you have 3 points in Q, right? At level 18, you're going to be 90 plus another 90 from the first strike plus 90 plus 90, so you're going to be doing 270 damage. But if you had the old Tiger Strike, it's going to be 130 plus another 130, so it's going to be 260 damage. So you're actually gaining 10 damage here if you don't max Q. But if you do max Q at level 5, you're going to be needing it to be... you're going to need to get to the 6th strike to make it worth it. W, Udyr no longer gains lifesteal while in turtle stance. That sucks. Udyr's first in every third basic attack while in turtle stance heals him for 2.5% of his max health, increasing up to 5% based on Udyr's missing health. So I think this is a better mechanic, because lifesteal is something that only really matters if you have AD. And I'm not saying it doesn't matter, but like the more AD you have, the more your lifesteal matters, right? So the fact that it's based on his max health makes Udyr more of a stun bot, as he should be, because you really shouldn't be building AD on this champion from a theoretical perspective. So I think this is a buff and a pretty good one because your max health should be coming out from items like Dead Man's Plate. You typically want to be doing either REW max or like QEW or EW or some variation whereby you want W max. And you're going to be building a lot of health items, things like Dead Man's Plate, maybe Frozen Mallet, Locket, these types of items. So I think this is overall a buff to Udyr. Would I be playing Udyr? I don't know. I feel like champions like Udyr fit in a similar archetype as champions like Olaf, where their cooldowns are so low that they can 1v1 junglers like Lee Sin or Elise, given the opportunity. But the lack of mobility is a situation like they don't have the ability to go over walls. They rely on the blast cone. How do they go into the lane to initiate? Do they run Ghost? And if they're running Ghost, they don't have Flash, which is okay, right? Olaf runs Ghost. So it's more of a snowball-y type of pick, right? Because Ghost has a lower cooldown than Flash, which means you're going to be making more net amount of plays with your cooldown on Ghost. So I feel like it's a situation whereby it's good, for sure. These are definitely buffs. But is Udyr as good as Olaf? Maybe with like 3 points in Q. Could I see Udyr being played in solo queue? For sure. Do I think he's good enough for competitive? Probably not, because the mid-late game structure of the game is set in such a way where the jungler, the support, or the top laner has to be the main initiator. And insofar as Udyr is slightly blue reliant, that kind of hurts the jungle structure. So, like, if you put him in jungle, he kind of needs blue or some type of mana sustain. Sort of like Olaf does, but Olaf can still operate in the jungle, so I guess Udyr can still operate in the jungle. And could you put Udyr in the top lane? I guess you could put him as a stun bot response to the current top lane tanks like Nautilus or Shen, but he doesn't have to initiate. The main problem is initiate. So if you're going to pick Udyr in the jungle, then you kind of have to rely on your support and your top lane to have the major forms of initiation, and you're the follow-up. Similarly, if you put him in the top lane. But why would you put Udyr in the top lane when you could put Shen there? And is he a better aggro pick than Kled? I don't know if Udyr's a better aggro pick in the top lane than Kled. I don't think this would work well in a lane, because in the lane the enemy isn't going to let you get successive auto attacks off onto you, because they can just back away from the scenario a lot of the time. Like, you might go stun Q, 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 and maybe get a multitude of autos off, but why would he ever let you get the stun off in the first place if he's not willing to take that trade, right? So I don't think he really works in the top lane. And in the jungle, maybe if you get a really nice gank off and get a couple Q autos, maybe you can operate as a tank follow-up. And in that case, you would probably be maxing R anyway, which means that your third Q would be okay. So I guess maybe he sees some jungle play. I could see it happening. Howling Abyss I don't give a damn about. Twisted Tree Line I don't give a damn about. Mastery Storm Research now has a louder visual effect, sure. Krugs, many Krugs now leash back to their nook, not the place where they fell apart, and their variant side, sure. Discolor now submerge a bit more slowly. Allowing hidden visual effects for sure. War Death Auto, Wars Not Play, Gold Sound, sure. Loot. And rotating games. Weak line update. Fixing sure that's calling the play button just here. Now focus password, profile background, blah 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 blah. Lucian Q was bugged, they're fixed, bug fix. Shoulder ran now does properly. Gragasy would sometimes pass through targets. Fix a jump with Jax could not use Blast Cone Plant after Q. No longer choosing visuals with ults, product mastery, blah blah blah. And upcoming skins. So that's patch 7.8 review. And I briefly glanced at the mid-season 2017 changes, but they didn't have any numbers, so that kind of pissed me off. Sejuani, passive. After not taking damage for a brief period of time, Sejuani becomes immune to slows, gains bonus resist. Frost Armor lingers briefly after taking damage. Frost Armor refreshes faster with Sejuani movement. So you see, he gets the little bit of invulnerability from being slowed or whatnot. So this is the type of thing where you want, when you're trying to get this Q engage on, you want to be able to walk up to them and Q, but I don't think the enemy team should ever be in a position where you should land Q on them without having to use your flash. So your main initiate is always going to be your ultimate. So this doesn't really matter because your Q shouldn't be the main way you hit them anyway, unless you're coming from a brush, in which case they're misplaying anyway. So we should be looking at the ultimate first, or second in this case. Sejuani throws her True Ice Bola, which damages, stuns, and freezes the first champion hit based on distance traveled. Long-range bolas leave behind an ice storm that slows enemies, interrupting after a brief delay to damage and massively slow enemies except the original target. So she throws it, and then there's this aura which slows Ashe, and the main target does get stunned. So I think that this is pretty good. If you do hit a target, then they are going to get stunned for sure. So that's good. Major form of initiation by hitting this, having to force enemy flashes or, Mikhail's QSS or dashes of some sort. So that's pretty good because Q is really hard to hit. So ult is going to be your main form of initiation on this champion, and then your follow-up is going to be walking up to them with your passive and then throwing in your Q. People around the target get slowed, so there's going to be a bit of a toggle between should we try and save this person and move into the risky initiation area, or should we try and get away, because we don't want to take the residual end damage there. So maybe again, you're always going to be initiating onto priority targets, such as the mid and AD carry as your priority. So if you do hit them, are we going to defend the squishy AD or the squishy mid carry, AP carry? And if we do, we're going to be taking that residual damage and we're going to be entering a slow field. Doesn't seem too good to do as the enemy team, right? So really good on your ultimate situation and slowing the people around you. But if we look at the Q, it's relatively the same. Dashing forward, knocking up enemies. This is going to be the same. Charge stops at the first enemy champion or a large monster hit. So that's generally pretty good. And your W is your Winter's Wrath. You have a little whip and then your linear skill shot. So just look at that again. Your cone, your anti-cone is going to be there. And it hits all targets at the same time, so it's not clockwise. You'll be hitting all at the same time. And then your follow-up is going to be a short linear skill shot. Looks like maybe a little less than Taric E range, roughly. Sejuani swings her mace in front of her, then slams it down in a line. Both swings deal damage and apply frost. So if we look at it one more time, you have one stack of frost coming in from that, and a separate stack of frost coming in from the individual swing. So you're going to have the 2 stacks of frost coming in. And I think that if we look at the speed of the E, the second part of the E, it's not like a delay like Taric ult. So it's going to be a lot easier to hit, or Taric E, so it's going to be a lot easier to hit than Taric E, right? So it's just like 1 second later. So insofar as you're in alignment with your initial cone and then you're centralized to hit your second part of your W, it should be a decent skill shot to be able to hit. Sometimes you're going to be missing because they'll juke. It looks like it's relatively thin. Yeah, this looks like a relatively thin line, so maybe the juke ability is up there. So maybe they don't necessarily get hit by the second part of your W, which is going to be bad for her. This looks like your main source of wave clear and jungle clear and all that stuff. Any permafrost. Sejuani's basic attacks apply frost on champions and large monsters. Nearby ally melee champions also gain this effect. Frost stacks up to 4 times. Active, Sejuani damages, stuns, and freezes target enemies with max frost stacks. Sejuani's first attack or ability against a frozen enemy deals a portion of their max health as damage. So this is a main part of her kit, right? This is what puts Sejuani all together. Let's talk about the active first. So you see that she needs 4 autos or 4 sources of frost to be able to activate permafrost. And we have to look at what sources can't you have to activate it first, right? So her ultimate, if it hits, it's going to activate them, but her ultimate doesn't seem like it applies a stack of permafrost, right? Ashe does not have the frost animation, and no frost is applied on her from the ultimate. So what points apply the frost stack? Her own auto attacks. Her Q does not seem to, I think. Right, her Q does not seem to apply the frost stack. So the only ways to apply her frost stack is with her own auto attacks, with her W, and with these melee ally auto attacks. So let's think about the structure of her engage, right? Her ultimate into her Q. Her Q is going to unfreeze the target, knock them up a little bit, and then you're going to get one auto from that. Or maybe your combo is QW at the same time. I don't know if you can use W during the same time as your Q animation, but let's say you can, right? Let's say you have to Q, and then you do an auto as they're knocked up, then you do W, and you hit it, you proc 2, and then you need another auto yourself to proc the permafrost, right? That's a 4-spell combo, right? Because the only way you're going to hit your Q is if you hit your ult, unless you have Q flash. So maybe you flash Q or Q flash, I don't know what works on Sejuani, into an auto W auto. And then you have to hit the W. So that's a lot to ask for to be able to proc your E. Let's look at it if you can W while you're in Q animation. If you can W while you're in Q animation, then you're almost guaranteed the second part of your W hitting, but then you need to get your one auto off and then another auto off before they can get away, right? So if they have any type of dash, any type of flash or mechanical outplay, then your E won't proc. So I think that if you don't hit your ultimate, you're going to be hard-pressed to proc permafreeze, unless you have other sources of slow or CC to be able to get there. Such as allied spells or things of that nature. But when you think of your nearby melee champions being able to proc this, you might have, because range supports are king and queen, and range AD carries are the best, and range mid laners are the best. The only place you're gonna really proc permafrost from is from the top lane if you're going to play this in the jungle, and from the jungle if you're going to play this top lane. And so let's think about Sejuani in the jungle first, right? Can Sejuani contest other junglers right now? No, you're going to die to Lee Sin, right? I don't think we're at the state where you can still get away with utility picks because Thunderlord is still stronger and Sejuani can't scrimmage as hard. Maybe in micro scenarios where you can pick a tank jungler, such as scenarios where you can pick Ivern where all 3 lanes shove, so your jungle isn't contestable because your laners will collapse for you. Maybe in that micro situation, Sejuani can be picked up in the jungle. But even then, the only synergy with another melee champion is going to be coming from the top lane most of the time. And do you really want to gank the top lane when you're 6? No, right? Top lane is typically the tank lane, the ignorable lane, because the dragons are up, and you don't really want to visit the top lane until Herald is up. And even then, Herald, you would have gone the first dragon, or the first dragon would be off the map, so you would have swapped the bot lane into the top lane because you would have gone the bot turret already by the 10-minute mark. So, like, putting this in a situation where this passive basically says you're going to have synergy with the top lane doesn't really matter in a competitive setting. In solo queue, who gives a damn, right? In solo queue, people are going to pick, 80 mids like Zed and Talon, and or melee supports like Tahm Kench, Braum, Alistar, whatever. But in competitive, the Sejuani passive here isn't going to be good enough, and you're going to have a hard time proccing this unless you have follow-up setup, and you're going to be contestable in the jungle. Maybe in micro scenarios, in competitive play where all lanes are shoving, that you can defend your Sejuani, and where your support is a responsive melee champion. Maybe like Tahm Kench for Global Initiative when they pick Braum. But that's so like situational. Why would the enemy team pick Braum when they can pick Thresh, right? Maybe top laners like Nautilus Shen, and then you can do a follow-up engage, and you can be more of a initiate with R, follow-up with your top laner. but your top laner has to be able to beat the other top laner, which means that it's going to be hard for them to be a tank in the first place, because then they just get Kled picked into them. So I don't think we're at the point where Sejuani's that pickable yet. Zac, when I looked at this, Zac was pretty broken, but I only saw minor snippets. So Cell Division, each time Zac's ability to an enemy, he sheds a chunk of goo that can be resorbed to restore health. Upon taking fatal damage, Zac spits out 4 bloblets that attempt to recombine. After a brief delay, Zac revives with health based on the health of the surviving bloblet. So this is his same passive, and he gets these passive blobs that spawn randomly, seemingly. I never really liked the random aspect of this, but it's okay. And then he dies, and then it's the same passive. They look like they move a little faster, so the fact that the Zac blobs move faster than before means that it looks like a Zac buff to me. And by the way, Zac was already in my rotation of picks in the jungle for pick, so I still think he's a good pick. Stretching arms. Zac's arms stretch and grab the first enemy it hits, like this. And you see that there's a tether range where they can leave, seemingly. And slowing them. Zac's next basic attack grants bonus range, and if Zac attacks a different enemy, he'll throw both targets towards each other, dealing damage to an area if they collide. So we're saying that 1Q into an auto is the typical combo. Zac stretches his arm. So when you see that Zac stretches his arm here, I'm assuming this is duration. And I'm assuming that, like, this kind of scares me a little bit, because is this the tether range? Is it that if Ezreal moves over here it detaches, or is it that Ezreal moves over here that it detaches? And I think that this is the range that Zac has to be within for this to be active. So this range looks pretty decent, right? And then if you get an auto attack on another target, they'll toss them together. So his Q is not only a slow now, but it gets a little bit overloaded because it also has this added collide ability. Because you still have the slow from before, and it's still AoE for jungle clear. But now it's just like, it seems a little bit overloaded to add a lot to this Q. So it seems a bit strong. W, body erupts, damaging nearby enemies, absorbing goo, reduces unstable matter's cooldown. So this is the same W we all know and hate because it's pretty boring in this game. Looking at this, so far the passive has been a buff. The Q has been a buff. Obviously, we don't know the cooldowns and we don't know the numbers of any of these spells, but insofar as we don't know that, we're going to say it's a buff. Zac charges up and launches himself towards the target location, knocking up nearby enemies. Zac spawns extra chunks of goo for enemy champions hit. So this is the same E we know and hate. I like the little portrait animations that they do now, though. And this is the real game changer. Zac squishes himself into a puddle and charges, becoming immune to crowd control and slowing enemies that stand on him. So immune to crowd control, that's important. Reactivating less bounce without fully charging causes Zac to reform, knocking back nearby enemies. If Zac charges for at least a second, he sucks up enemies above him, carries them towards the target location, damaging enemies into the area upon landing. So if he charges, this is the full duration charge amount. He'll carry enemies with him, right? But without being full charge, it just knocks back nearby allies, right? So if you get a full charge off, then you're going to take them with you. But if you don't get a full charge off, then you're going to be knocking back allies. And I would have liked for them to show that, of course. But as he's going down, he becomes immune to crowd control. So this is uninterruptible. And I feel like Riot is doing this with a lot of the kit. And, Rengar kit and, Malzahar W not being able to become crowd controlled. And slowing enemies. You slow enemies that stand on top of him, right? And it takes a full 1 second for him to do the suck up animation. So first, the obvious combination is to flash in and then use ult, or to E in and then, get the Q, auto someone else in range, right? Typically you would like 2 people in this at least, so that you can get the Q on one and then auto attack the other one in melee range after your E. Press your W because it's a no animation spell, and then you would pull them together, slow them with your Q, slow them with your ult here, and then try and plop these 2 targets into your team, maybe more. And if not, you're just going to be knocking back nearby enemies. So this is a little bit different than your previous ult, because your previous ult you could knock back multiple enemies, and you can move around in it. But I feel like insofar as you're using Zac as an engage tool, and Zac's primary role in the game is an engage tool, you're more satisfied with this because you still have the knockback potential that you had before. Less knockback on consecutive targets, but you really only care about the target you're initiating on, right? So you still have that part of your kit from before, but now you have the option of bringing them into if you get to charge down, which is a huge game changer if you can ever get CC onto the primary mage or the primary AD carry. And this should be a general buff because I see this as a buff for the ult, a buff for the Q, and a buff for the passive. And Zac was already on my radar because he's a tank jungler that can exist in the jungle because of his relatively low cooldowns like Olaf can. And even Olaf or even Zac can go Thunderlords to contest the Elise Lee Sin jungle champion structure. So I feel like with the changes to his Q and with the changes to his R, Zac's definitely going to be seen as we approach a more tank-oriented top jungle structure as we've seen. As well as the fact that he is one of the tanks that has percentage damage as well with his W. So I think Zac is super strong, and this should only make him stronger given that the numbers are good. So watch out for Zac. Pick ban, in my opinion. And Maokai. Maokai passive basic attacks periodically heal him. Sap magic cooldown. Reduce for each spell Maokai cast or is struck by. So this is pretty much the same, but this is now reduced based on spells Maokai casts or struck by rather than just spells that the enemy uses. So I think that's a buff, depending on what the cooldown is now. Let's go to Q, smashes the fist in front of him. This is the exact same Q. W is the exact same W, dash root. E changes, so sapling toss. Maokai flings a sapling into stand, watch over an area. Saplings chase nearby enemies, exploding if they come into contact and slowing everything. Sapling space and bushes last longer and deal additional damage over time. Does this change? Maybe it changes a little bit because now that you have this extra brush duration, you can kind of use it as a warding tool. Again, we're probably only going to see Maokai out of the top lane or the jungle situation, and the fact that you can place it longer in brushes means that maybe you can, for the initial jungle clear, you can drag it to the Raptor situation a little bit better, or you can do the red buff better, or you can do the blue buff better, things like that because there are bushes there. Outside of that, the additional damage really doesn't matter. You don't really pick Maokai for the damage, but the fact that you can put it in the brushes to scout for late game Baron situations is a little bit nicer. But overall it's fairly low impact outside of initial jungle clear and scouting. And the ult changes the major thing coming for Maokai. Maokai summons a colossal wall of brambles and thorns that advance forward, rooting enemies struck. Root duration increases the farther the wall travels. So he throws his ult, and looks like they get a little faster. Do you think that this gets faster? It starts off pretty slow, but they start to pick up speed. You see, it's still pretty slow. It seems way slower than a Nami ult. So it seems fairly it seems fairly dodgeable. Okay, so we can say for certain, unless this is pinned against the wall and this is pinned against the wall, champions are going to be able to dodge side scenarios. Like if this is in a spread out area, this top one and this bottom one isn't really going to hit. So this seems like it has major impact in the lane scenario, or the jungle scenario, rather than the river placement where it can dodge. I also want to say that it looks like this is the area of effect, so I don't think you can dodge in between them. And you're going to be advance forward and root grasp. So this puts Maokai in a different place where before Maokai's only primary source of engage was TP flank with home guard potential, you know, the move speed, or flash W. And those are both extremely summoner dependent. And the fact that you don't really want to use your TP like that unless you're 100% guaranteed to play, because you want to be able to split push if the play doesn't work out. And flash is a longer time cooldown, and you're only getting the I think it's 15% reduction from the mastery tree, and you're not getting any other sources. So I think that this makes him a less summer spell reliant champion, insofar as he has another engage structure, so you can R and then flash up with, or follow up with just walking forward with W and Q. That being said, it doesn't look really fast, right? It looks kind of slow. So this is mostly going to be successful in the lane situation and the jungle situation, because in the river the side trees are going to be dodgeable, and most of these trees are like there's a lot of escapability in the river generally, although it does look rather wide. So I can see a lot of impact plays being made where you're using this into the jungle and there aren't that many escape routes, so you get the engage in the jungle, or you use this as a dive initiative tool. So we have to look at the state of Maokai in the jungle and in the top lane. Can he contest jungle picks in the current meta? I don't think so. I think he'll die to Lee Sin almost every time. So similar to Sejuani, you're only going to be able to pick tank junglers like this in compositions where all laners are already winning. But that's the same problem with Sejuani, right? Like, let's say you put Sejuani, I don't know, Sejuani, Ahri versus Syndra, Lee Sin, right? Who's going to win the 2v2? Pre-6, it's always going to be the Lee Sin winning the 2v2 if the lane is matched, right? Because there aren't that many mid lanes that are just so much more oppressive than the other mid laner, right? In the bot lane, it's a little different because there are supports that are more oppressive than other supports. I'm talking mostly about Karma or Zyra. But in the mid lane situation, like, there's no mid lane that you can set up, in my opinion, without having extreme bans in the game. That one mid lane is always going to be extremely dominant over the other mid lane, right? Like, no Ahri versus Orianna or Orianna versus Syndra or whatever is going to be so one-sided that you can say with 100% certainty, yes, if we put Sejuani here and the enemy team has Lee Sin, we're going to be able to win that 2v2, right? It would have to be a scenario where you, like, pick your mid laner, or, like, where you ban out a lot of mid laners and you pick the strongest mid laner there, and the only other mid laners you're leaving there are suboptimal, and or like you're forcing them onto, or like the enemy team picks Zed or Talon openly, which is dumb, right? So I don't think, insofar as the mid lane structure doesn't allow for oppressive picks right now, you can't pick these junglers like Ivern, Maokai, Sejuani in the jungle yet. It's too risky. And insofar as some supports are oppressive, maybe you can do it with that, but again, you need all three lanes to be able to win, to be able to pick a tank jungler, because otherwise you're going to be losing pressure. And mid lane, if you don't have pressure in the mid lane, then it's going to snowball into your jungle. So I don't think it's in a situation where you can pick Maokai jungle yet. Can you pick Maokai top? Sure. Is he still a tank among tanks? No, because his ult is now not damage reducing for people in it, which was the main thing. So now his ult is just an initiator. And is his initiation way stronger than Nautilus ult? No, because it's not guaranteed lock-on, and Nautilus's follow-up is a lot stronger generally with Q and passive auto CC and shield and all this stuff. Like, what does Maokai E even do comparative to Nautilus's weakest spell? Right? R is an engage, Q is an engage, W is a huge shield with percentage health, and E is a slow and an AoE wave clear. Right? What is Maokai E compared to Nautilus's weakest spells? I think this just puts Maokai below Nautilus now, in which case it's pretty much Nautilus versus Shen. Durability items, Gargoyle's template, Chain Vest plus Negatron Cloak. This one's a Teamfire item. We don't know the amount of armor and MR, so we can't really comment too much on this, right? Passive, +3. If +3 enemy champions are nearby, gain bonus resistance. We don't know how much. So if it's a decent amount, then, you know, clear team fighter, we want to be into 3 people. And we're mostly talking about these tank initiators, right? Because it builds to have Chain Vest, Negatron Cloak. It seems like it's a tank item for the jungler or for the top laner to build up bonus resistance. These engagers like Nautilus, like Zac that we've been talking about. Unique active, Metallicize. Temporarily gain health and size, but deal reduced damage. If Stone Skin is active, the health increase is massively boosted. So I think that you want to use this as an item that's built primarily 3rd and plus, because when you're building your first item, you're still primarily in the lane phase, and second item as well. So you're going to be building this relatively in the 3rd part of your build. So if you're a pure tank generally, and you want to be building this on pure tank because you're going to be dealing reduced damage, so you don't really want to build this on 80 or AP semi-tanks, you want to be building it on pure tank champions. So the best pure tank champions right now are going to be Shen, Nautilus, Zac, Olaf. It depends on if true damage goes through or not, so that's important. So those are the main champions you're going to be building this on. Thresh maybe, but Thresh doesn't get into the middle of the enemy line as much as the primary tanks, because Thresh builds supportive items, you know, more defensive peel oriented heal tank items, whereas junglers typically build items like Ranuance to slow, you know, Righteous Glory to get in, Dead Man's to get in, and have the initiation tools to get in. Thresh can't really sustain that type of damage generally. So we're talking about like your hyper tanks, like your Zacs. Primarily Zac, Nautilus, Olaf, and Shen, primarily. And if we think about those champions, which are the best in the meta right now for these tank type of items, you're going to be wanting to build it 3rd, because your first item should be to answer your lane opponent generally, your second item as well somewhat, and because the parts give you armor and MR, you're going to be wanting to access health in your first or second item, because what's resists without health, right? So your active temporarily gains you health, and I feel like, so this kind of answers back all 3. It gives you health, armor, and health, or armor, MR, and health. So you're going to be accessing a lot of stats with this item, but you're going to be decreasing the amount of damage that you're doing. And if you're going to be getting into +3 enemy team champions, you're going to be needing to get into the backline a lot of time, right? So when you think of Nautilus, for example, your combo is really ult into Q, or flash ult into Q, or Q into ult, right? And then you're only getting on top of the frontmost target that they have, that you're picking off, which is primarily their mid lane or their AD carry, right? That being said, they're in the frontmost area, right? So the 3 nearby ally champions, I don't know what their range radius is, but if the radius is small, those people are going to be far away enough that the Stone Skin isn't going to proc. That being said, if they're too far away, then they're effectively ditching that individual sometimes, but maybe not, right? So I don't think this is the best to build on Nautilus. Or even Shen, because Shen engage pattern is E-Flash and doesn't have a really strong engage, because E-Flash is so cooldown reliant and it's only going to be hitting the frontmost target generally. I feel like it's best in flank scenarios or if you're playing Zac, right? So if Shen gets a really sick flank on the backline, or if Nautilus gets a really sick TP flank on their backline or something, or if Olaf gets a really sick TP flank, and that's so game dependent, right? It's not a general case that you can do this. I wouldn't build the item for that, right? Because the TP flank play, or the flank play in general, is so hard to do against proper ward structure for you to get in that situation. TP flanks work best when you have an obscure ward put in a position with home guard, and then you can do an engage from that point. So maybe in solo queue, I wouldn't recommend building this item like that. Or maybe I would, right? Maybe the warding structure is so bad where I could recommend building this item that you can get those flanks on these tank champions. But in competitive, that's hard to do, right? Because all the wards are going to be accounted for generally. You're going to be pressing tab to see how many wards the enemy dropped with their Sightstone, and you're going to be sweeping all these areas to not get TP flank wards, and you're going to be playing around these flank areas. So I think that in competitive, at the highest level, flanks aren't going to work a lot of the time. Because against good teams, flanks shouldn't happen, right? So at the highest level, this should only really be built on Zac at the moment. Because he's the one that can get to the backline. I mean, granted that they should be playing around Zac engage, right? So I feel like this item kind of relies on your enemy team to mess up, to get a good flank, for Zac to get a good angle, for your team to get a good TP flank angle. And so this item kind of says they're going to screw up at some point, and I'm going to make use of them screwing up to get these bonus resist and bonus health. So overall, I don't think this is a good item at a GTO net endgame play, but if people are going to make mistakes, as people do because League of Legends is a game played by humans, then I guess this is an okay third item plus type of build through the 4 champions mentioned. Adaptive Helmet. Spectral Cowl plus no magic mantle. Health MR. Base health regen. CDR. CDR is pretty important for tanks. Taking magic damage from a spell reduces subsequent magic damage taken by that spell within a brief window. So we're talking about spells, right? So jungle, top, and support aren't doing the major amount of damage, and 80 carries that operate in spell rotations aren't out there right now, really, because Corki's out of meta because Bork is strong. Maybe Ezreal slightly, but I think Ezreal's isn't magic damage, right? Or is it? Actually, I think it is. Ezreal's Q is physical damage, my bad. So yeah, and Corki. Corki's R is magic damage, just to reconfirm. But Corki's out of meta now, so I don't know why I'm even talking about him. Yeah, so Corki's R is magic damage, but there are no 80 carries in the current meta that have these rotational spells that do magic damage, right? So we're primarily talking about mid lane mages. So we think about what mid lane mages are strong that have consecutive spell rotations, right? The occasional Ryze pickup, the occasional Cassio pickup, oppression lane. These are champions that aren't really at the forefront of the mid lane situation. The repetitive cycle mids are going to be... see, I don't have any on my list, but maybe Syndra. Maybe Syndra with multiple Qs. Orianna is a huge one. With multiple spell, with Q and W counting as a spell, and then E counting as a spell as well. So I think that, when you think of this unique passive, you're thinking primarily of what spells do we take multiple damage from that are spells that are, that matter in the game. And you're really thinking about Orianna mostly, right? Orianna is the best candidate for this, really, outside of Cassio. And so when you think of Orianna, do you want health MR and CDR? Sure, right? Taking magic damage from a spell reduces subsequent magic damage taken by that spell within a brief window. So this is a very situational item against these 2 or maybe 3 particular picks. So who's going to build this? This is a tank or a top lane item. And you have to look at this in comparison to other items, right? So do you want to build this first? Let's say in the top lane first, right? Well, if you're Shen against Nautilus, which is the the main top lane tank matchup. Although I feel like Zac might get some appearance in the top lane now as well, because Zac is so overtuned in my opinion, depending on the numbers. If you're going to be playing this top lane, would you want this item or Spirit Visage, right? To deal with your lane opponent. Remember, your first item is still a lane phase item, right? Your second, third, fourth item are the adaptive team fighting items if you're a tank. So, do you want this item first if you're Zac top? No. Do you want this item first if you're Shen top? No. Do you want this item first if you're Nautilus top? No. Right? So, do you want it second? Well, if we're saying that the primary tank top matchup is going to be, you know, Nautilus versus Shen with maybe Zac sprinkled in there, then you're going to say, well, we picked up Spirit Visage first, right? The primary MR item for our top lane, the health MR CGR item, you know, the glorious top lane item for Nautilus versus Shen, where both are doing magic damage. Well, now we need to pick up some armor, right? We already have MR, now we have to pick up some armor versus the AD carry. So the items that we're going to build are going to be the Randuins, the Ninja Tabi, the Deadman sometimes, not really too often. The Frozen Heart, not really. I'm not a big proponent of the Frozen Heart. Mostly the Randuins, but probably the Ninja Tabi, right? So the way I see it is Shen is going to go Spirit Visage into Ninja Tabi, into, you know, maybe this item situationally against exactly Orianna, Cassio, and Syndra. Same thing for Nautilus and same thing for Zac. Whereas maybe you want to pick up the Gargoyle's Stoneplate as well. Or instead, for the third item, if you're almost exactly Zac, right? And in the jungle, what do you want to do? Well, you're going to want to finish your Cinderhulk, and you're going to want to get your warding ability down or your slow ability in there as the tank jungler. Again, if you're playing a tank jungler like Zac or Olaf, or Sejuani, that means your laners are already winning. So you can build Cinderhulk. If you're Zac, you want to pick up the Spirit Visage. I mean, if you're Zac, I guess you could skip the Spirit Visage and go for this instead in the jungle, because in the jungle you're effectively team fighting in small situations, right? You're not bound for your first item to be in the lane phase situation. So I guess you could build this first. But I don't see it as a situation whereby because think about the state of MR items, right? So if you have an MR item, the enemy mid laner needs either Liandry's or Voidstaff to be able to kill you, right? And when does Syndra, Orianna, Cassio pick up Liandry's or Voidstaff? Either second with a Morello Liandre type of build, or third where the Voidstaff picks up in the Cassio build, roughly, right? So is there a need to rush Adaptive Helm, or when you can just build Spirit Visage and they won't have penetration yet anyway? You know, like, I guess if the enemy Orianna or Syndra goes exactly Morello Liandre's, then yes, I guess this would be your second item after Cinderhulk, right? Because you want MR, you want health, and they can do damage to you, so now you need this more than before. Whoa. But if they were playing Cassio and they're going tier, you know, Catalyst Roa, picking up, I don't know, the Negatron Cloak somewhere, and then going for the Void Staff, then you probably have enough time to pick up the Spirit Visage instead. And the Spirit Visage would be more than good enough until she finishes Void Staff third or fourth. And then you can do this as a fourth item to match her speed, her tempo speed, right? Like, you only need to build items as fast as the enemy is building the penetration item into you. So that's what I think about this as a second item. But overall, I think this is a nice niche item. And non-tank pickup GA. I really am not sure about this change. Now you're getting 80 in armor. Upon taking lethal damage, revive with a portion of health and mana after a delay. So they're kind of turning GA into a AD carry item. and somewhat of a mid lane item, right? So do tanks want to build GA because you have effectively a 5 second, and maybe it's not 5 seconds anymore, but you have effectively a 5 second point where you're CCing them because you're going to revive in a situation, right? But do you really want to build longsword and pickaxe and cloth armor for your parts as a tank? Not really. You're kind of de-incentivizing the situation, and you're kind of putting this in a spot where you kind of want to build it on the more bruiser champions like Kled, like, Darius or Renekton, because these bruisers split push, and when these bruisers split push and they can beat the other tanks, they might have to drag other people down, and when they drag other people down and you proc GA and you're alive for 5 extra seconds, that means that's 5 extra seconds that they have to wait to kill you, that your team can do Baron on the other side of the map, right? So I kind of see like tanks are de-incentivized to build these types of items. Pure tanks are. Bruisers are incentivized to build these types of items. AD carries are incentivized, and even the mid lanes are incentivized to build these types of items because the Hextech Gunblade is a popular pickup in solo queue on the LeBlanc and certain other champions, of course. The Lee Sin really, really, really likes this item, of course. And I think they're kind of shifting the GA away from the pure tank onto the bruiser AD. And this kind of just shifts AD carries and mid laners into defensive orientation. Because why would you build... Like, if AD carries, or if backline DPS champions have an incentive to build tank or tank items over bruiser over damage items, then why wouldn't they take the safer option, right? Like when an unstoppable force meets an impenetrable object, the impenetrable object wins, right? Defense is going to trump offense always because the offense is going to die to something. The defense is going to die to nothing, right? So when we think of what builds this can change, right? The Kled build can go from Black Cleaver into GA, right? Because Kled kind of wants a little... Like, Kled doesn't really need to build MR against Nautilus and Shen because Kled will win every matchup against those bruiser tanks anyway. So Kled is going to be like, okay, well, I'm going to build Cleaver to kill you guys, and then I'm going to itemize to win the game in a split push with GA. Or my initiation is going to be so much stronger with GA now. And then they can just build armor and MR. Well, they can pick up the armor here. They have the health with the Cleaver, and then they just need to pick up the MR item, right? Maybe they're going to pick up, the adaptive helm up in situationally against the picks that we talked about, or maybe they're going to pick up the the Maw or the Edge of Night or something else. What is Lee Sin going to do? Or Darius is going to do the same thing that I just described, and Renekton's going to do the same thing that I just described. Cleaver into GA is going to be really strong, with maybe minor emphasis on picking up MR in the Merc Treads or things I just talked about. What is Lee Sin going to do? Lee Sin's going to finish his warding jungle item, warrior with, and then he's going to say, okay, so what's my path, right? Do I need MR? Now I have a new MR item I can build. I can build Merc Treads. I can build the other MR items on the map. I can build what armor items I can build. Oh, well, now I have another armor item option that gives me 5-second effective CC with GA, right? Is that better than my alternatives before? I don't know, Deadman's was pretty good for me on initiation, but I can probably find angles on Lee Sin. Tabai is pretty good for me, but the stats of Tabai haven't changed, so I can still build Tabai. Randuin's is pretty good as a slow, but GA is also a pretty good CC initiative, right? This is giving these tanks more options. And then we think about AD carries that are going to build this, right? AD carries that... So what is the AD carry structure right now? Bork first item 100% of the time, right? So we're thinking about the Lucians. We're thinking about the... Callistas, the Dravens, these things, they're going to build Bork first. What are their second items? Well, we already have the first item that's going to be penetrating health, but, we want to build some source of health. You know, we see Lucian as the primary pick, so we'll just talk about Lucian. Lucian wants to pick up the cleaver, so Lucian has health now with the cleaver stats, and instead of picking up Ninja Tabby, maybe we can pick up GA after that, right? Bork, cleaver, GA. Now we have the 80 stats, might be a little bit stronger than Bork, cleaver, PD, or Bork, cleaver, rapid fire, or Bork, cleaver, you know, IE. Maybe we don't need IE. Maybe we can pick up enough damage from here because we're already doing so much flat damage with pen from the cleaver, or shred from the cleaver, and health damage from the Bork, that maybe we can now just itemize Bork, cleaver, GA. And then we can pick up our MR, like, you know, like if we have to deal with if we have to deal with AP, maybe we go Bork, cleaver, hex with Ninja Tabby, and then we'll pick up GA fourth to pick up some extra armor. Or maybe we can go Bork, cleaver, Ninja Tabby, cloth versus all AD comps. Or, you know, there's like so much itemization now for AD and so much initiative for AD carries to go third item GA, fourth item GA, that defense is going to be the most optimal way to play the game. If we think of mid laners already are going for Liandres, right? You remember that the old Orianna build, and we're bringing up Orianna, Syndra, because because these are primary types of mages in the mid lane. Cassio, not so much Cassio, but so Orianna, Syndra, Ahri, their main build used to be Morello, either Ludens or Deathcap into Voidstaff third, right? With, you know, boots, so effectively Voidstaff fourth item. But now the builds these days are Morello, boots, Liandres, right? We pick up the pen as the third item. So if we can pick up the pen as the third item, the Liandres, because, you know, we're doing percentage damage now in this tank structure, the 2% health damage is going to be so strong, now we can go for the fourth item GA, right? So now we can, you know, now for Cassio, and we're picking up Tyr, Negatron, Roa, Liandres, again, no boots. Those are, you know, like 4 items, and they're like half items because Tyr is like a half item, and Negatron is like a half item. So it's effectively like Tyr and Negatron are like is like 1 item together, and then Roa. So you have health and MR with the Negatron, and then you just need armor, right? So instead of picking up the Seekers, what if we pick up GA fourth? So now instead of, you know, because Cassio is a champion with almost infinite DPS, maybe she can go fourth or fifth item GA with a fourth item Liandres, or a fourth item Board and a fifth item Liandres, or going into a fifth item GA. So I think that there's a lot of flexibility now for these champions to be able to pick up these important items that they couldn't do before, which is going to lead us into a tankier meta. Ancient Coin line. Borrow a skill point from your future self. Quest reward. Gain an elixir that grants a skill point when consumed. You still have a max of 18 skill points, meaning you'll finish leveling your abilities at 17. Takedowns on enemy champions grant gold and restore mana. So it depends on how hard the quest is done. Is it just like free? So quest reward. Gain an elixir. It's a reward, right? So there's a quest. Gain an elixir that grants you a skill point when consumed. Takedowns on enemy champions grant gold and restore mana. So it depends on what the quest is, right? Like if the quest is super easy, then everyone's just got to build this first item and then just get level 2s everywhere, right? Like why would you want to opt for a level 1 when you can get a level 2 early in the game? But if it's more of like a, you know, a 5-minute item, then maybe you want to build this first, right? Because the first, like, if you can majorly differentiate the bot lane spike or the mid lane spike or the jungle spike or the top lane spike by getting 6 while the enemy is still 5, then that's super, super strong. Outside of that, I don't see this being taken because the difference between level 7 and level 8 is minimal. The difference between level 10 and level 11, it's kind of strong, but it's fairly neglectable because the lane phase structure could have ended by then, so you can't necessarily take advantage of that. So if you can be strong in the early game using the Ancient Coin, then on support like this, then it should be good. But we don't know what the quest is, so we can't really comment on it too much. Relic Shield. Get another shield from your shield. Quest reward. Gain a shield that regenerates while outside combat. Proccing Spoil of War makes shield regenerate faster. So I think this is actually really strong. I don't know if you still have the old Relic Shield proc, right? If you don't have the old Relic Shield proc, then that sucks. But if you now just gain a shield, that means your trades are going to be more beneficial because you have a perma shield, which means your trading in lane is now substantially better, and you don't need to rely on like the inefficiency of mid and late game to proc your Relic Shield stacks, as well as the fact that in lane the amount you heal is okay, but probably worse than whatever shield you're getting. So this looks like an overall buff, but it looks like a net nerf to the amount of gold that you're going to get, depending on whether or not. And we don't know what the quest is, so we can't really say much. And we don't know the quest is here. Move faster when you poke people. Who really cares about that? Tribute procs grant a burst of movement speed. So if this is still meant to be a support item, which I don't know if it's still meant to be a support item because we don't know what the quest is, right? If, like, what is the burst of movement speed you gotta do? We're gonna poke them, and then the burst of movement speed is only gonna matter if we're gonna get away or if we're gonna go for an all-in, right? So let's say I'm Lulu, right? And I'm getting chased down. Maybe I can proc Spell Thieves with an E or, you know, with a Q on them to slow them and proc it, and then I can get away. Depends on how much move speed we get. Additionally, maybe we hit them with our Lulu E, and then now we can chase them down for the all-in. So it depends on what the quest is, and it depends on how much move speed. We don't really know enough to mention too much about these. Gameplay clarity, game impact tracking, Herald. Herald now drops a Herald Eye when defeated. Use the eye before it expires to bring Rift Herald back to structure smashing siege minion. As an ally, Rift Herald will push down the nearest lane, reducing enemy buildings to rubble unless forcibly stopped. Fighting against her in lane is similar to fighting her in the pit. Poke her in the eye to send her crying home to the void. So, I think this is super impactful in general. I'm going to assume a couple of things. I'm going to assume that Rift Herald still only spawns at 10, so you can only get it between minutes 10 and 20. If that is true, then you're in a situation where you're going to have the best way to play the game should be to get mid or bot pressure into winning the scenario, into the first drag, into a reset, into getting bot turret. And once you've gotten bot turret before the 10-minute mark, you want to do a lane swap. Swap your bot into topside so that you can contest the Herald coming up at 10-minute mark. Get that and then do a reswap into the bot for the second dragon. That's the best way to play the game in general since Herald has been released. And I feel like depending on how strong the Herald is now, if it's as strong as the current Herald, it's going to take a long time to kill. Because if you need to proc the eye, then the eye is going to be behind, right? So if you're sieging with Herald, then you're going to be put in a spot where you know, you're never going to be able to proc the eye. And then that's going to be, like, if you're entering it with a minion wave, because you choose when you proc Herald, right? So you're going to choose when Herald spawns because you have it in your inventory. And inventory space isn't that important from the 10 to 20 minute mark, depending on when the expiration time is. You're going to be putting it on the map pretty early. So long as you put it with a minion wave, you're going to be getting so many autos off. Like, it takes at least 30 seconds to kill the Herald. So, and that's proccing the eye. So if it's a minute siege time, granted that the minions are probably going to die, but you're probably going to siege a lot. And you're probably going to get a turret off this a lot of time, because why would you use this if you're not going to get the turret from it, right? So you're probably going to use this as a pressure play if you group to get the turret that you're on. And I feel like it's almost effectively going to be a free turret depending on how much health the new Herald has and how long the buff lasts and how strong it is. Alternatively, you can use it in an early game as a split push tool, right? We think of things like Banner of Command or ZZ Portal, ZZ Rot Portal, and it's effective in a split push scenario from the 10 to 20 minute mark. So let's say that you know, you swapped and right in a competitive setting. Let's say you got Dragon at 6 minutes, you got bot turret at 8 minutes. Now you're swapping into the top side, and you won the top side fight because you're snowballing the game. Then you're getting the Herald at 13 minutes, and you got the top turret at 15 minutes. Then maybe you want to use it as a mid lane siege at 17 minutes, right? Or maybe you ended up not getting the top lane turret. so that maybe you can throw the Herald into the top side and then go for a mid siege, right? Now they have to answer the side wave with your TP, shove the other side wave with your Herald, and now the mid wave that you're grouped on, right? It's effectively a 7-person shove because of your top lane being able to TP to the mid lane structure situation. So I think Herald is going to be really strong depending on the numbers. Honors update. 10 bans. When 10-ban format comes to overhaul, who gives a damn? There are fundamental differences in how bans are used in two different scenarios, so we'll be adapting the ban system and needs some effort. In regular play system, we want to make sure we give all players equal agency. Everyone gets a ban while keeping champion select fair. It doesn't matter where you are ended up in the pick order. If possible, you're also cutting down the champ select's overall length. Expect to see short. Okay, so I'm okay with shorter champ selects. Once 10 bans launch, you'll need to own 20 or more champions to play ranked. Give you an IP boost this weekend. Okay, team composition. Playing league with friends or normals. It's one thing, but we think there's an opportunity to add a new competitive experience to the league. One different from the now retired ranked team queues. We want to organize teams to compete for rewards, but include an appeal to players of all skill types. Think something along of forming a team with your friends and entering an amateur tournament together where stakes intensity ramped away. We still I think this will be really fun. I think that giving team orientation gives lower tiers, mid tiers, higher tiers more incentive to, and insofar as there's this incentive that they're talking about, right? Incentive to learn more about team composition, learn more about how to play the macro map. Because right now, individual solo queue players up till Challenger, even in North America, don't understand simple concepts of side wave prep control, right? Like, people don't understand that in North America. So I feel like if we do this from a bottom-up approach and we help the people at the bottom, right? Bronze teams are, bronze teams, silver teams, gold teams are now trying to learn about these macro mechanics to try and win these prizes that they're incentivizing people to do. Then this will do bottom up instead of the trickle down that we've been trying to promote since the dawn of time, right? The trickle downers are saying is like, okay, pro teams do this. Bronze players should learn from that. And trickle down hasn't worked over the past 7 years, right? So instead we're trying to go bottom up now with team competition. And I really like this change. I feel like going bottom up might be one way to do this. I feel like 10-ban is good. More competitive aspects of the game, lower champ selects, and MSI, and that's it. So that was pretty long. We're an hour and 45 minutes in, but we talked about patch 7.8. We talked about the mid-season changes, and I hope you like the content. It's pretty in-depth. I kind of go into how it affects the meta and all this stuff. So thank you guys for watching. If you like the channel, feel free to subscribe here on YouTube, Chinese Jester. Follow me, Lol Chinese Jester, on Facebook, Lol You Matter on Twitter for updates on when I release videos, when I stream, all this important stuff. And make sure to follow me, twitch.tv/Lol Chinese Jester, to watch when I stream. Thank you for watching.